Day 11 of Women in Antiquity. Today we're going to be talking about that fascinating individual, the Roman matron, and ideas of gender in the Roman world. So first let's talk about the Roman world itself. And since we're switching from Greece to Rome, we'll have a little bit of background to cover. I'll try to do it as quickly as I can. So the Roman origin story starts much later than the Greek. The Romans are part of a large wave of Indo-European migration into Italy, one of several such massive migrations out of the Indo-European homeland that we've seen into the Mediterranean world over the course of ancient history. We've seen two influxes of Greeks, and here we see an influx of Italian peoples that takes place toward the beginning of the Iron Age. And so Rome starts to emerge as a single entity out of the various villages that are that populate the hills near the fording of the Tiber in the place where Rome now lies, somewhere around the 7th century. The Roman tradition has its founding date in the middle of the 8th century, 753 BCE. But what we can tell archaeologically points toward a somewhat later date. In particular, the lands in between the great hills that are the heart of Rome, the Capitoline, the Palatine, and the Aventine. The lands in between them were originally swampland, and we see these marshes being filled in and constructions being made upon them. The paving of the Roman Forum and the building of some of the earliest constructions, the earliest temples and public buildings around the Forum. This is taking place around 650. And so this is a little bit more consonant with the Roman legend of their own origins. The regal period for the Romans involves a succession of 7 kings, starting with the legendary figure of Romulus. And 7 kings is a little bit more likely to be reasonable in a period of 150 years rather than 250. In any event, the Romans cast out their kings just before the year 500 and enter into a new era, a new kind of society. The basic idea of the Republic is that it is governed by a large number of noble families that share the responsibility for the state. And the structure of the Republic is designed to ensure that no one individual becomes more prominent than any other. And so the Republic ends up being governed as a sort of a collection, a succession of figures that are highly trained in war and governance, but then pass on their duties and responsibilities to other members of their generation, and increasingly to the next generation. And so, as a result, the Roman Republic, creates one of the strongest states in the ancient world through this very unusual situation of collective governance. It is very much not a democracy. It is not ruled over by the people, although, of course, it has an assembly that votes laws that are put before it, and the voices of the people are very strong, and there's a great deal of tension between the nobility and the masses. But the governance of the Republic is in the hands of the aristocratic families of Rome. So successful is this form of government that it is under the Republic that Rome is able to accomplish its dominion of the entire Mediterranean. It begins by dominating central Italy around it, and then gaining hold of the entirety of Italy itself, and then control of the Western Mediterranean. And then by the year 150, it has more or less cemented its domination of the Eastern Mediterranean as well. The Hellenistic East, that is the legacy of the conquest of Alexander the Great, are essentially under the dominion and influence, if not, in some cases, outright rule of the Romans themselves. So the Romans are able to complete the foundation of their empire, the control of the entire Mediterranean world, with the accession of Egypt, the death of the last pharaoh, Cleopatra VII, in in 31 BCE after the Battle of Actium. And so it is the Republic that creates the Roman Empire. And only when this empire is in place does the Roman Republic fall apart in a series of extremely bloody civil wars, leading to the supremacy of a single surviving warlord who becomes the Emperor of the Romans, the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of what we call the Principate, this being the actual title that Augustus and his successors used, Princeps, the first man in Rome. And so when we talk about the Roman Empire, we should be careful to understand that the actual Roman Empire, the Roman dominion of the civilized world of the Mediterranean, is accomplished hundreds of years before there are actual Roman empires. It is accomplished by the Republic. Interesting to note, too, as well, the Principate, the Roman Empire, as ruled by emperors, is normally understood to end with the fall of the city of Rome to the barbarians in the 5th century CE, in the 470s. But in point of fact, by this time, Rome had created a second capital in the east, at the site of the old Greek colony of Byzantium, at the crossing from Europe to Asia, at the Bosphorus from Southeast Europe, from the Balkans into Anatolia, what is now Turkey. And this becomes the Roman capital city of Constantinople, and Rome ends up being ruled as two empires with two or more emperors. And so when the city of Rome falls, the Roman Empire endures in the east, and it endures for another 1,000 years. The Roman Empire does not fall until the Turks finally take the city of Constantinople in 1453, one of the harbingers of the end of the medieval era. Our evidence for Roman history is problematic for our earliest periods. The periods of the kings and the early republic we know about from writings that come from hundreds of years later, from the end of the republic, and this is due to a number of things. The Romans, part of the Roman identity is to reject luxury and decadence and indolence. The Roman identity, what the Romans of later times called the mos maiorum, the ways of our ancestors, the Roman identity is built around self-sacrifice and austerity. And so they tend to see both ostentatious displays of wealth and things that are done for leisure, including history and the writing of literature and theater, as things that belong to the decadent East. More on that in a moment. But this means that one of the primary sources of history that we have for our earliest period has to do with legends and folktales, and also family traditions, which are actually very important to the Romans. When the Romans would hold a funeral of an important individual, one of the things that would happen at that funeral is that the dead person's ancestors would be present and would speak eulogies of both the deceased and of the family and of their own accomplishments. This is accomplished through actors, through the preservation of death masks of important ancestors that are kept in a special cupboard in the house of every important Roman. And these masks would be accompanied by small scrolls which would describe the accomplishments of these ancestors. And so it's important to great families to preserve the traditions and accounts of their most famous historical members. As you might imagine, these tales are subject to embroidery. And so as a result, we have family traditions that make their way into the Roman collective history later on, that include a certain amount of spottiness and a certain amount of distortion. over the course of the Republic, as the city of Rome becomes more important, as it comes to dominate and rule over more and more people, it comes to respect and admire certain elements of Eastern culture, the Greeks and other Easterners, and in order to demonstrate their legitimacy as a great civilization, they begin to imbibe certain kinds of Greek customs, the Greek language itself. Certain ideas of Greek political structure and Greek ideas of literary expression and rhetoric. And so, by the end of the Republic, the Romans are writing their own histories. They're writing their own plays and poems, originally on the Greek model, and before too long adapted to the Roman spirit and the Roman identity. And so, at that point, the Romans start to try to tell their own story. The story of the Romans is determined in part by geography, as it is for all peoples. In the case of the Romans, Rome and Italy is very far from the heart of the civilized world. The civilized world in the ancient era is Mesopotamia and Egypt and Canaan and Anatolia and the Aegean, the Eastern Mediterranean. And this is where the great wealth, this is where huge amounts of commerce and the movement of people and the interchange of ideas is taking place in the Eastern Mediterranean. And so, Rome is lying far from this in the Western Mediterranean. It emerges relatively late in ancient history, and it is part of the much more subdued trade environment of the Western Mediterranean. And so, on top of this, Italy has always been a combination of different peoples and cultures. Even today, Italy is a single country, but it is not a single culture. And so, in the early history of Italy is conditioned by a couple of things. Already present in Italy, before the Indo-Europeans arrive, are the Etruscans. And the Etruscans live to the north, on the western coast of Italy, in the land that is still named for them, Tuscany. The Etruscans called it Etruria. And then the Indo-Europeans arrive, and Indo-European culture, the Indo-European society, is one that is unlike that of the Mediterranean peoples. And so the Etruscans, for example, are in some ways a typical Mediterranean people. Even though they are unique and they're not related to anyone, and their language is unrelated to any other language in the ancient world. The Etruscans live in city-states. They are urban, they are centralized, they have a highly hierarchical class structure, they are ruled over by kings, and they live in a city-state culture, much like in the Aegean, much like in Sumer, in which identity is focused on the center of the city-state, on the heart of the city, and on the patron deity associated with it. And the city-states of Etruria share a common culture, but are in rivalry with each other politically and economically, and sometimes militarily. This is the typical Mediterranean setup that the Etruscans have. The Indo-European peoples, the Indo-Europeans have an economy that is based on pastoralism. Their primary agricultural base is the keeping of domesticated animals, cows, sheep, goats, so forth. And so they are much more mobile. They live in a wide expanse of land, and so instead of relying for water for transportation, like the Mediterranean peoples do, they rely on the cart and the axle. And their social structure is loose and spread out because pastoralism requires large expanses of land for grazing, and so their social structure is non-urban, decentralized. It is tribal, it is clan-based, and the Indo-Europeans don't have a heritage of cities, don't have a heritage of boats. Instead, they're centered on horses and carts. We've seen this with the Mycenaeans. And now we're seeing it again with the Italians. And many of the Italian tribes that move into Italy essentially retain this pastoral lifestyle. They're the ones that settle in the highlands. If you look at the map of Italy, there is a mountain range that runs down the center of the peninsula that is known as the Apennines. It is sort of the spine of Italy, and it is the pastoral Indo-European peoples that remain that way, settle along the Apennine, and persist in this pastoral, rustic, decentralized, non-urban lifestyle. But a few of the Indo-European tribes settle on the coastlands to the south of the Etruscans. Prominent amongst these are the Latins that settle just to the south of the Tiber River. And like the Mycenaeans, they see the city-state peoples that are already native to the region. They see their success as a society and seek to emulate it. They embrace the idea of improving themselves, of seeking progress as a civilization. And so they build city-states like the Etruscans, and they model their political ideas around those of the Etruscans, and they imbibe a great deal of the Etruscan religious ideology as well. More on that in a moment. And so these are the Latins that end up being over a little over 20 city-states that are founded in a relatively small and compact region just to the south of the Tiber. The greatest amongst these, what emerges as the stronger and most ambitious, is Rome. And so, as we can see, Italy ends up being this hodgepodge of different kinds of peoples that we can see from the language groupings. And this includes not only the Etruscans and the Indo-European peoples that arrived from the north, but also the Greek colonists that settled in various colonies to the south, in the boot of Italy, further north, including the great city of Neapolis, what is now Naples, and on the island of Sicily, one of the strongest, most wealthy, and most populous Greek colonies in the world, the city of Syracuse, on the island of Sicily. There's a further diversity because the Phoenicians are active traders in this region, originally as part of the Phoenician trade routes that stretch out from the Phoenician homeland in Canaan. Fairly early on, not long before Rome itself is founded, the city of Carthage is founded around sometime in the 8th century. And Carthage, this Phoenician colony, becomes the basis for Phoenician trade power in the Western Mediterranean. Eventually, Carthage becomes the main rival of Rome for trade dominance in the Western Mediterranean. And ultimately, Rome's nemesis. That's a rivalry that builds toward a life or death struggle in the Punic Wars, the wars between Rome and Carthage, that feature such great figures of ancient history as Hannibal. And so there are a number of parallels, as you can see, between Rome and Carthage, and the similar rivalry between the Mycenaeans and Troy that, again, ends up in a life or death struggle during the Bronze Age, several hundred years before. And so the Phoenician traders are active in the Western Mediterranean, and they bring with them a number of things that have influence over the Etruscans and the Romans, the city dwellers on the coastal plains, as opposed to the rustic pastoralists in the highlands. These include the Tyrian purple, the royal purple that is available only from the Phoenicians, and so is therefore a very quickly adopted amongst the Etruscans and the Romans later as indicative of status. Only people at the top of society could use this color of purple, and also the alphabet. As the Phoenicians had passed their phonetic alphabet to the Greeks, so too they passed it to the Etruscans, who passed it further on to the Romans. To the south, Magna Graecia, the lands of the Greeks in southern Italy, is still in very lively contact with the Greek world of the Aegean. Italy is not that far away from Greece, and so the Greeks of Magna Graecia are very much in tune with the burgeoning culture of the Greeks, very much in tune with the Greek ideas of expression, and also very wealthy from trade. The Etruscans themselves, what we can say about the Etruscans is relatively limited, because the Etruscan society is eventually subsumed by the Romans. The Romans, as part of their process of dominion, undertake a process of Romanization, in which the culture of the lands that they rule over is slowly absorbed into the Romans, and thereby is assimilated and starts to disappear. So the Romans, don't make the mistake of trying to repress the culture of peoples that they rule over. They simply Romanize these lands. There is a great deal of advantage in being Roman, because of the prestige involved, because of the advantages of trade, and political advantages as well. And so, next generations of peoples that the Romans absorb and conquer, actively are motivated to learn Latin, the language of the Romans, and to pick up and embrace Latin ways and goods, and so forth and so on. So, as a result, the Etruscan language virtually disappears. The stories of the Etruscans vanish. Even stories that are written by the Romans have not come down to us. The Emperor Claudius is known to have written a history of the Etruscans, which has not survived. And so, what we know about the Etruscans is partly from what we see from their burial remains. So, for example, this sarcophagus decoration of a married couple, and the bits and pieces that the Romans tell about them as part of their own history, and the elements of Etruscan custom that embed themselves in the way that the Romans do things. One of the most influential things that the Romans take on from the Etruscans is a fundamentally important idea that the Etruscans and later the Romans cannot do anything important without first consulting the gods. And this means that the gods must be consulted before any major action by the state, whether it's the passing of a law or even the meeting of the assembly, the declaration of war or peace, treaties, taxes, any kind of public action, including the inauguration of elected officials. For the Etruscans, the way in which this works is the Etruscans practice something called Aristocratic, in which the priests take an animal sacrifice, for example, a sheep or a goat, or sometimes an ox, depending on the occasion, and they kill the animal, cut it open, and examine its liver. And the disposition of the liver, whether the liver is healthy or has blemishes or whatever, is indicative of the disposition of the gods. And so if the liver is healthy, everything is okie dokie, and they can proceed with whatever it is that they were about to do, that they were consulting the gods about. But if there is a problem with the liver, if it is blemished or diseased, then the gods must be propitiated, and they cannot act until the problem has been resolved, and either a new course of action is decided upon, or the gods are shown to have changed their mind. What we're looking at here is a diagram of a liver that was used by the haruspex, that is mapped out according to individual deities. And so by this means, the Etruscan priests would know which god was concerned with the action that they were planning to undertake. The Romans adopted this viewpoint, and throughout their entire history, the Romans are not able to undertake any major action without first consulting the gods. The Romans at first use the Etruscan method of consultation, using examination of the liver, and this continues to be one of the ways in which the gods might be consulted, but they very quickly adapt this to their own methodology by undertaking a vigil in which the sky is examined for a period of time, usually in the quiet of the very early morning, And the sky is mapped out into quadrants, and the movement of birds is observed. And certain kinds of birds and which way they are moving and so forth are taken as omens by the Romans and interpreted by the specialized priests that undertake these observations as to the disposition of the gods. These priests are called augurs, the priests with special responsibility for observing the skies in this way. And the practice of consulting the gods is called augury. And this is why, since the consultation of the gods is necessary, as I said, for the induction of an elected magistrate, this is why the installation of an elected official is called to this day inauguration. The natural result of this amongst the Romans is that the priestly class becomes politically empowered, with ramifications that we will talk about. The Latins are, because they're very closely packed together, they are both in rivalry with each other and also in very close communion. Unusual for city-state cultures, it is possible to, for example, marry a citizen of another Latin city and bring that woman home to you. It is possible to, for the Latin cities to share and celebrate certain festivals together, and so forth and so on. Latium itself, as I said, is a fairly compact area, and Rome becomes the preeminent city amongst the Latins. This is partly by virtue of its location. Rome lies along the trade passageway that parallels the Tiber from the main ports at the mouth of the Tiber inland, and it also lies at a key, one of the best fords of the Tiber. It is difficult to cross the Tiber to the north and to the south, but in this place here, just south of the island that you can see in this image, there is an excellent ford. And just to the Roman side of this, on the east, is the one of the oldest open spaces, one of the oldest marketplaces of the Romans, the Forum Boarum, the cattle marketplace. And so the Romans, from their earliest history, are particularly keen on understanding the hospitality toward the foreigner and the contributions that outsiders can make to Roman society. The Roman king is a priest king, somewhat like the kings in Sumer. In other words, the king is responsible for liaising with the gods and conducting the most important of the priestly rituals on behalf of the entire community and overseeing the priestly class. And of course the king is also central to ensuring the smoothness of relations between the classes of the Romans. The Roman monarchy is an elected position. It is not originally dynastic, and so the people that are chosen to be king are each strikingly different from each other. And in fact, Roman legend tends to assign key elements of Roman society, Roman political structure, and religious structure. Each king is sort of responsible for helping to create some part of Rome. And this is a function of legend. This is the fact that we know we have no direct actual history of these rulers. We only have the legends that are associated with them. The structure of Roman society is built around the family, not around the individual. We've seen certain elements of this in other societies to the east, but it is extremely true amongst the Romans. Essentially, the Roman family is this, and when I say family, I mean extended family, the individual sort of subset of the clan, all of the people that descend from a particular individual. This extended family is each one of these is sort of insulated so that everything within it is private, and everything within it is the domain and responsibility of the eldest male the paterfamilias. And the paterfamilias is sort of is responsible for representing the family to the Roman public. And so, as a result, the Roman society, the Roman aristocracy during the regal period, especially during the Republic, is made up of these chunks of family that interact with each other. And it is very much not about individuals that might arise within these families. It is about the families themselves. And so the paterfamilias becomes the dominant figure within a family, as well as one of a member of a part of a group of similar men that are the heads of their own families and who are each at similar, each have a similar kind of power and influence within the family, but are more or less the same, more or less part of this collective magistracy that the Romans have. And so, these family representatives form a part of the advisory council to the king that becomes the Senate, and later on, the Senate is the chief advisory body to the Republic. It has no constitutional power, but it preserves the Roman tradition and sees itself as guarding, protecting, and saving the true nature of what it means to be Roman, what I called before the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancestors. Roman names are very illustrative of the preeminence of the family in Roman life and the unimportance of the individual. And so here we see a fairly typical Roman name, Gaius Iulius Caesar, which is one of the more famous of the Romans, Julius Caesar. It is his name, what we call his name, his nomen, is Iulius, which is his family name, his gens, his clan name. His praenomen, his first name, even this goes hardly any amount at all in identifying him as an individual. First of all, there are only a dozen to 20 or so of these praenomen, these first names, that are used regularly in Roman society, and so everyone you meet is Gaius or Lucius or Marcus or Posthumous or Aulus or whatever. Quintus, Sixtus. These names are all in common circulation, and on top of this, they are often systematized and automatic. In other words, within a certain family, the first son in each generation might be always named Gaius, and the second son always named Quintus, and so forth. So even the first name, the praenomen, hardly does anything to distinguish the individual. On the contrary, it reinforces the collective nature of the Roman aristocracy. A part of your formal Roman name is your filiation, your immediate ancestors. And so what this is actually saying is Gaius Iulius, Gaius Filii, Gaius Nati, which means son of Gaius, grandson of Gaius. And so once again, even your name, is as much about your ancestry and your family as anything else. It is possible for you to get a nickname, a cognomen, which might help to distinguish you. But there are two things about this. First of all, these cognomina tend to be unflattering. And this is part of the idea that the Romans resist the singling out of individuals. And so Caesar, for example, means hairy, and hairy in a way that is not necessarily gorgeous to behold. There are cognomina that one of the other well-known Romans of the late Republic is Marcus Tullius Cicero. Cicero is a word that means chickpea, garbanzo, but the context for this was some ancestor of Marcus Tullius Cicero had a large carbuncle on the side of his nose that was the size and shape of a chickpea, and ended up with that nickname. And the second thing about this, as you can see, is that once the nickname is bestowed, it becomes passed on, and it becomes the name not for an individual but for a branch of a family. It becomes further reinforcement of the importance of family, even if it was bestowed as a result of some attribute of an individual. So here are some examples of typical Roman male names: Marcus Tullius Cicero, that I just mentioned, Sempronius Gracchus, Aemilius Scaurus, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. Even Magnus here, Magnus means the great. This is Pompey the Great. Even that was bestowed as kind of a joke. In other words, Pompey was a follower of the dictator Sulla, but had a very great sense of his own self-importance. And when he came to Sulla, he brought his army with him, a private illegal army that Sulla very much needed in order to win against his enemies. But in return for this, he demanded to be called Pompey the Great. And Sulla agreed because he thought it was hilarious. And I can imagine that whenever Sulla said Pompeius Magnus, you could hear these sarcastic quotes. But most of these, Cicero Gracchus, Drusus Brutus, Sulla, and so forth, are names that originated in the mists of history and became may have started out as nicknames, but ended up being names for branches of families. Occasionally you see a complementary cognomen. So, for example, Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius. Metellus Pius was called that because Pius, it's the origin of our word pious. In Latin it means devoted to one's parents, to one's father. And later on in the Christianized Middle Ages, it became devoted to, God the Father. But, Pius was remembered for having been loyal to his father when everyone else turned against him. There's also people that are newcomers, that are what the Romans called novus homo, new men. So, for example, Gaius Marius. Gaius Marius has no important ancestry. He had, in particular, you were counted noble amongst the Romans if one of your ancestors was a consul or a praetor, and Marius had none of these things. He didn't even have a cognomen. And so, ended up sort of having to force his way to the top. Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, became powerful by attaching himself to Julius Caesar. Clodius Pulcher means the beautiful, and so Publius Clodius Pulcher was called the beautiful because he was so good looking that he looked like a woman. Scipio Africanus was given the name Africanus as in recognition of his conquest of Carthage, of his defeat of Hannibal and the armies of the greatest threat that had ever existed to Rome. And this is a rare example of a cognomen that was actually granted by the Romans to an individual to single them out as having accomplished a great thing on behalf of the Romans. And even for this man who saved Rome, the preeminence that he enjoyed afterwards made everyone uncomfortable, and the Romans did everything they could to ensure that Cornelius Scipio Africanus was blocked out of and prevented from using the influence that came from his glory to further his own power. The next two are famous Roman poets, Virgil and Horace, in English, and the last is the great dictator Fabius, who helped make possible the defeat of Hannibal by making Hannibal chase him up and down Italy without engaging in a battle, to give the Romans time to recover from the disastrous defeat at Cannae. This is why he gets the nickname Cunctator, which means the delayer. All right, so anyway, Roman names. Another thing about Roman names is, as you can imagine, so I've emphasized the importance of family in Roman life, and the unimportance of individuals. This probably will suggest to you something about marriage, that marriage is going to take place in Rome amongst the Roman aristocracy through arranged marriages as the bondings of individual families rather than the love matches between individuals. And if that occurred to you, you're right. And so part of the problem is that the Roman aristocracy ends up getting married to people that they might not particularly like or want to have sex with. And so even though there's sort of a duty to perpetuate your family name, to have children, to perpetuate the aristocracy, the Romans end up, the Roman aristocracy ends up having a problem generating tradition, generating children, especially in its oldest and most prestigious families, because the Romans are sleeping with their mistresses instead. And so the Roman solution to this, apart from occasionally passing legislation that encourages childbearing, is if there isn't an heir and there's a danger of the family name dying away with your generation, what you do is to find a young man, and by young man I mean somebody who has already served his required military service, already shown potential as a Roman leader, to find a young man of a less important family that is willing to trade their son for a certain amount of money. And so there's a common practice in the Roman aristocracy of adoption to further the family, and this is preserved in the family name. So, for example, Gaius Octavius ends up being adopted by Julius Caesar and becomes Julius Caesar's heir, eventually the Emperor Augustus. And so his formal name goes from being Gaius Octavius to, he takes his new father's name and then adds on to it the adjectival form of his old name. So he becomes Gaius Iulius, Gaius Filius, Caesar Octavianus. He becomes the Octavian Julius Caesar. And here's the real kicker. The preeminence of family is preserved in the masculine names of Romans. It's even more preserved in the feminine names of Romans. If the children of the Romans, if they're born a male, they get a praenomen as well as the family name, the masculine form of the family name. If they're female, all that they get is the feminine form of the family name. And so the daughter of Gaius Julius Caesar, for example, would simply be named Julia. And if he has another daughter, that daughter is also named Julia. And if he has a third daughter, that daughter is also named Julia. And so, of course, in everyday life, these could easily be distinguished by common attributes. Julia Major would be the older Julia. Julia Minor would be the younger Julia. Julia Tertia would be the third Julia. And so forth and so on. There's ways of doing this conversationally where you can refer to which Julia you're talking about. But the fact is that what names the male Romans have are part of their public persona, and women in Rome have no official public persona. Throughout their lives, women are legally under the guardianship of some male. And so the process of getting married is legally the handing over of responsibility for a particular woman from the father, or if the father is dead, the eldest brother or whatever, whoever the paterfamilias is of the wife's family, to the husband. If a woman, if there's a divorce, which is possible, the woman reverts to the guardianship of her own family, and if she is a widow, she may remain part of the family that she married into under the guardianship of whoever is now the eldest member of that family, which may be her eldest son. So, what does this mean for our understanding of gender in ancient Rome? One of the things that is problematic in studying gender in particular is that when we look at ways in which gender is reflected in certain aspects of society, they become very distorted. We've already seen this with mythology and literature. The ways in which mythology and literature portray gender is a distortion, is a deliberate distortion of everyday social norms. Legally, the Romans have a very sharp divide, as we've seen, between the public and the private, and the public world is very much the domain of the citizen. Citizens are property holders and those who can fight for that property, and so the citizen is male. And that means the public world is the world of the male in Rome as in Athens. And so what this means is that the law is how people interact with the public world. And so women interact with the public world through men, through those who are empowered to act publicly, through those who are citizens. Does that mean that women in Rome are repressed? Not necessarily. The fact that women must be legally understood to be under the guardianship of a male does not mean that women lead oppressed lives in Rome. We need more information. We need more evidence than just the legal aspect, which deals with very specific kinds of interactions in the public domain. And so, when we look at marriage, for example, there are two kinds of marriage. One is marriage with monos, marriage with the hand or the handing over. This is the ancient formal tradition of marriage, and it is essentially identical to the ceremony of the transfer of property. There is also a form of common law marriage, which essentially says that if you have lived together for a certain amount of time, then you can be considered married. Marriage with monos is required in certain of the more prestigious families, but the large majority of the Roman masses and many of the families within the aristocracy do not bind themselves to using only marriage with monos. Children in Roman society, in the aristocracy, children are looked after often by tutors, and so there will be a wet nurse for infants, and then there will be a pedagogue, somebody who's responsible for young children, for beginning their education and so forth. As Rome becomes stronger and more powerful, it demonstrates a status in a number of ways within, from family to family. One of these is the accumulation of domestic servants. All aristocratic families, in order to demonstrate their status, they need to have servants in the household, and a large majority of these are slaves, including the individuals that take care of the children. And so, within the aristocracy, the connection between mother and child is often sort of secondhand through the domestics whose immediate day-to-day responsibility is the care of the children. The Roman economy comes to depend more and more on slaves in general, both for domestic life, for the cultivation of large agricultural estates, for manufacture and factories. Roman industrial production becomes a key part of its economy, including textiles and ceramics and weapons and tools and so forth. And some of these factories are worked by slaves, and of course mining. But the thing about slaves in the Roman world, the Romans are accustomed to having slaves about them, and acquiring them as captives of war and so forth. But they don't assume that the condition of slave is hereditary, that certain kinds of people are meant to be slaves or whatever. They have much less of a sense of us versus them than even the Greeks, with their divide between Hellas and the barbarians. The Romans come from an environment of diversity within Italy, and the more places they dominate, the more diverse dominion becomes. And so their concept of enslavement includes the idea that this is a temporary condition. Manumission is freely available. Slaves can purchase their freedom, or they might be freed after many years of good service. And so as a result, there's a large population of freedmen and freedwomen in Roman society that are sort of, so we have the slaves as this bottom class, and we have there's another layer of people that are important to the economy that often serve in sort of positions in supervision of slaves, the freedmen and freedwomen, and then the Roman citizens. And we'll be talking more in the next in another lecture about the freed woman and the slave woman and how we understand their role in Roman society. The Romans place a great deal of importance on adapting to whatever is demanded in a particular crisis. They focus on the Roman identity and ensuring that it survives, but they understand that in order to survive, they must respond to crises with flexibility and with an openness to adapting to and adopting whatever new idea is necessary. This comes in part from having grown up between these much older and wealthier cultures, the Etruscans to the north and the Greeks to the south, and the awareness that they are late to the scene and that their origins are much more modest. The Romans know from the beginning that they are not the oldest or most sophisticated or advanced society, and so what they concentrate on is for Rome to be the strongest and the most successful. That there is that the quality of being a Roman, this rejection of luxury and ostentation and indolence, this embracing of sacrifice and austerity, this will make the Roman a better kind of person, despite the fact that Rome itself is younger and rawer than all of these older and wealthier societies. And so when the Romans encounter a crisis, they take into themselves whatever is necessary in order for that quality of being a Roman to advance to the next chapter of their story, rather than being crushed and destroyed by those who might be older and more powerful than themselves. And eventually, through this stratagem, the Romans become the strongest and most powerful nation in the world. All right, so the readings, the Roman Matron. This is a great chapter. This is very important that you read this chapter if you haven't already. This is an excellent summary of a huge amount of information about what it means to be a Roman aristocratic woman, a wife and mother within the Roman nobility, the Romans themselves had very definite ideas of what is the ideal Roman matron, in the same way that they had very definite ideas about what is the ideal Roman male. We see certain elements of this in the Roman women that are held up for praise. And so we see mentioned at the beginning of this chapter Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi. The Gracchi are two radical politicians that helped to bring about the years of civil war that ended the Republic. But Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi, is remembered as being the ideal Roman matron, both by Roman men and by Roman women. A century or two later, you still see women saying to themselves, "What would Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi, do in this situation?" And so it's striking what it is that she is praised for. Cornelia is far from being subservient or submissive. On the contrary, she is positive and engaged and aggressive on behalf of her family. We see a number of other examples of different kinds of praiseworthy matrons. We see Octavia, the sister of Octavius the Emperor Augustus. Octavia is remembered as being praised because even though she was provoked through by the misbehavior of her husband Mark Antony, who ended up abandoning her for Cleopatra and marrying Cleopatra, even though he was already married to Octavia. Octavia nonetheless continued to act as mother and to raise not only her children with Antony, but also Antony's children by his previous marriage. And continued to live an admirable, upright, and moral life, and to do whatever is necessary, for her as a wife and mother to protect and preserve her family. The most complex of these maybe is Livia, the wife of Augustus, who ends up sharing Augustus's responsibilities of rule over Rome, and doing so in a way that complements Augustus, and becoming responsible for sort of the private aspects of Augustus's rule. And so, for example, she becomes responsible for ensuring the morality of the members of the Senate, and striking from the senatorial rolls those who have engaged in some kind of moral turpitude. But most important that Livia stands up to stand beside her husband, and to ensure her husband's success. So our two primary source readings for today, the capture of the Sabine women. This is a story that is part of the legend of Romulus, the putative founder of Rome. And the basic idea is that the city of Rome was settled by a group of adventurers under Romulus's command, along with his twin brother Remus. And they were sort of breaking off from the larger cities to the south, and they create this new colony at Rome on the banks of the Tiber, and they realize that after a while that they forgot to bring any women with them. And so Romulus's solution for this is strategy, is craft, is subterfuge. He invites all the neighboring communities, including their nearby neighbors, the Sabines, to a joint festival in honor both of the founding of Rome and in honor of gods that they have in common. And while this festival is taking place and all the men are getting drunk, the daughters that they had brought with them are all rounded up by the Romans and married to them in a secret midnight ceremony. Now the Sabines come back the next day, and they are ready to wipe Rome off the map. They're ready to obliterate the Romans for this huge outrage. And according to the story, the armies of the Romans and the Sabines are lined up opposite each other, and they're about to fall into this terrible battle when the women that were abducted and married to the Romans rush out and stand between them and insist that they not fight. And what they say is that we are Romans now. You cannot take us. You cannot bring us back because we now belong to the Romans. And so, there's a couple of aspects of this. One is, the legal aspect that they have been handed over by marriage. More likely is the idea that this marriage was consummated immediately afterwards. And so, this means that they are no longer maidens; they are now matrons. They are now wives, and this means that their responsibilities have changed from being, maidens who were daughters to matrons who are now wives. This is, on the one hand, of course, this is a story about men taking women and making them their own. And in another way, this is a story about women who, having had this happen to them, understand what their responsibilities are. The kings are cast out of Rome, according to legend, as the result of a particular provocation. The son of the king, Sextus Tarquin, is the Tarquin himself was called Tarquin Superbus, Tarquin the Arrogant. And he had already demonstrated this arrogance in seizing the throne for himself. He's a usurper in seeing himself as being entitled to the throne because he's the son of a former king, even though that's not how a monarchy worked in Rome, and so forth and so on. Tarquin Superbus is already a bad king. And then Sextus, his son, is demonstrating even greater arrogance by he has a sort of contest amongst his buddies to figure out which of the women that they know are the most pure and noble. And Sextus decides to take the one that they decide is the most noble, Lucretia, and rape her in order to take this purity away from her. And as a result, the rape of Lucretia becomes the instigation, the catalyst for the Roman rejection of kings altogether. They don't just get rid of Tarquin Superbus and his son; they get rid of the whole idea of kings. The idea of subjecting themselves to the rule and arrogance of an individual had already been starting to grate on the noble families of Rome, and with the actions of Sextus, they are now done with it. The symbology here is vitally important. This is a way of, in terms of understanding the Romans, Lucretia, because she's pure, she represents something that the Romans hold in great value. The Romans, see themselves as warriors, and they, when outside of Rome, outside the sacred boundaries of Rome, they fight with ruthlessness, and in order to believe that they are, that the Roman idea is superior to all of these older and stronger societies, they must hold on to the idea that it is pure, and they invest that in their virginal women. They invest the idea of Roman purity in their virginal women, and they create the keeper of the eternal flame that represents Rome's immortality. The keeper of the Roman flame are a set of special aristocratic princesses whose role is to remain virginal their entire lives in order to preserve and persist the Rome's and embody Rome's very purity. These are the Vestal virgins who dedicate themselves to the goddess Vesta and to embody this concept. And so the rape of Lucretia, as a result, especially told centuries later, when this purity of the Virgin, and especially as embodied by the Vestal virgins, is a matter of course, is embedded in Roman public life for much further back than anybody knows. The one thing that could bring about the rejection of the very idea of a king is violation of a virgin. All right, so the Boatwright article, the Forum Romanum is the central open space of Rome. It's somewhat like the Agora, the marketplace back in a polis, in a Greek city like Athens. But the difference is, the Agora is the meeting place for everyone. And it is the central social nexus for men, women, and children throughout Athenian society. The Forum Romanum is the public space wherein public activities are undertaken. And by public activities, I mean civic activities. The meeting of the tribal legislature, the holding of lawsuits, and the publication of laws and the trade calendar and so forth and so on. And so this means that we see the forum is the domain of men. And so it's very interesting to look at the ways in which women impinge upon this male space. And so this is one of the things that Boatwright is doing. One of the things that comes out of this is, there are things that are associated with women and with female divinities, on the edges of the forum, but also that women become present in the forum collectively, that they show up in the forum as angry or weeping mobs of women in times of great cataclysm. And this is the manifestation of what is always there, the female concern for public life and for the future of Rome as mothers and wives, that in times of great crisis can emerge even into the forum itself. But the other thing that Wright talks about is that over time there is a greater shift away from this gender polarity, and there's more of a sense of presence and visibility for women, and for the importance of the marital bond by the time we get to the imperial era. Two Matrons in the Late Republic is an interesting article that looks at a few sort of case studies. One of which is Servilia, who is the mother of Brutus, the assassin, and a mistress of Julius Caesar, and so this is sort of to get a sense of the kinds of freedom and choices that are available to aristocratic matrons of the late Republic. The idea that there are certain kinds of choices and freedoms that are available that are not necessarily immediately obvious to us. And this is particularly, in light of the fact that in the period of the first emperors, at the beginning of the Principate, we're in the time of the first clan of emperors is called the Julio-Claudians, and so this is Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Nero, and the Julio-Claudians, this whole extended family, they rule over Rome for many decades. Augustus himself has power over Rome in one way or another for 50 years. But this family is short on men. And so there is a need for not only the assistance of women, like Livia, Augustus's wife, and Agrippinilla, and Antonia, and so forth and so on, to not only for the assistance of women, but also there is a very unusual sense to which legitimacy for rule is transmitted through women in the Julio-Claudians, and so this is to a certain extent this is not an exception, but it's the visibility and role of women in the Julio-Claudian family is much more expanded because of the accidental nature of this extended family. But it does mean that the precedent is set very early on for the importance, the contributions of female members of the imperial family, especially wives of emperors. And so the idea of an Augusta, the idea of an empress who has a role not in ruling over the Roman Empire, but in assisting the emperor's relationship with the lives of his ordinary citizens in Rome, is accepted and understood. The Augusta is not necessarily the wife. So, for example, Livia becomes Augusta, but she's also Augusta during the reign of her son Tiberius. And so the imperial women at Rome, is a further explanation of a similar aspect of the topic, in terms of the unusual nature of imperial women compared to the expectations of Roman matrons, and this ends up with a great deal of complexity. Because essentially there's something fundamentally conflicting about having a certain amount of public power and at the same time being the ideal Roman matron. And yet the ideal Roman matron, like Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi, is someone who is assertive and even aggressive in protecting the standing of her family. And so the so-called power of the Roman imperial women sort of needs to be seen in this light, that it's that the Romans would understand it in terms of the role of the matron as acting on behalf of and in protection of the standing of the family to which she belongs. And then the final article, Aemilia Pudentilla, this is talking about the situation of the Roman aristocratic woman in the colonies, in the provinces. In this particular case, the province of one of the provinces of northern Africa, and how these are, even with distance from Rome, the expectations of a matron and of a widow are part of the fabric of Roman society. All right, so take a close look at the Pomeroy chapter and talk about your reactions both to what you think is what you're seeing in the Roman attitude toward the matron and toward the maiden, toward the virgin, and also your reactions to the readings, the capture of the Sabine women and the rape of Lucretia. To protect and preserve her family. The most complex of these maybe is Livia, the wife of Augustus, who ends up sharing Augustus's responsibilities of rule over Rome, and doing so in a way that complements Augustus, and becoming responsible for sort of the private aspects of Augustus's rule. And so, for example, she becomes responsible for ensuring the morality of the members of the Senate, and striking from the senatorial rolls those who have engaged in some kind of moral turpitude. But most important, that Livia stands up to stand beside her husband, and to ensure her husband's success. So our two primary source readings for today, the capture of the Sabine women. This is a story that is part of the legend of Romulus, the putative founder of Rome. And the basic idea is that the city of Rome was settled by a group of adventurers under Romulus's command, along with his twin brother Remus. And they were sort of breaking off from the larger cities to the south, and they create this new colony at Rome on the banks of the Tiber, and they realize that after a while that they forgot to bring any women with them. And so Romulus's solution for this is strategy, is craft, is subterfuge. He invites all the neighboring communities, including their nearby neighbors, the Sabines, to a joint festival in honor both of the founding of Rome and in honor of gods that they have in common. And while this festival is taking place and all the men are getting drunk, the daughters that they had brought with them are all rounded up by the Romans and married to them in a secret midnight ceremony. Now the Sabines come back the next day, and they are ready to wipe Rome off the map. They're ready to obliterate the Romans for this huge outrage. And according to the story, the armies of the Romans and the Sabines are lined up opposite each other, and they're about to fall into this terrible battle when the women that were abducted and married to the Romans rush out and stand between them and insist that they not fight. And what they say is that we are Romans now. You cannot take, and so forth. But they don't assume that the condition of slave is hereditary, that certain kinds of people are meant to be slaves or whatever. They have much less of a sense of us versus them than even the Greeks, with their divide between Hellas and the barbarians. The Romans come from an environment of diversity within Italy, and the more places they dominate, the more diverse their dominion becomes. And so their concept of enslavement includes the idea that this is a temporary condition. Manumission is freely available. Slaves can purchase their freedom, or they might be freed after many years of good service. And so as a result, there's a large population of freedmen and freedwomen in Roman society that are sort of, so we have the slaves as this bottom class, And we have there's another layer of people that are important to the economy that often serve in sort of positions in supervision of slaves, the freedmen and freedwomen, and then the Roman citizens. And we'll be talking more in the next in another lecture about the freed woman and the slave woman and how we understand their role in Roman society. The Romans place a great deal of importance on adapting to whatever is demanded in a particular crisis. They focus on the Roman identity and ensuring that it survives, but they understand that in order to survive, they must respond to crises with flexibility and with an openness to adapting to and adopting whatever new idea is necessary. This comes in part from having grown up between these much older and wealthier cultures, the Etruscans to the north and the Greeks to the south, and the awareness that they are late to the scene and that their origins are much more modest. The Romans know from the beginning that they are not the oldest or most sophisticated or advanced society, and so what they concentrate on is for Rome to be the strongest and the most successful. That there is that the quality of being a Roman, this rejection of luxury and ostentation and indolence, this embracing of sacrifice and austerity, this will make the Roman a better kind of person, despite the fact that Rome itself is younger and rawer than all of these older and wealthier societies. A diagram of a liver that was used by the haruspex that is mapped out according to individual deities. And so by this means the Etruscan priests would know which god was concerned with the action that they were planning to undertake. The Romans adopted this viewpoint, and throughout their entire history, the Romans are not able to undertake any major action without first consulting the gods. The Romans at first used the Etruscan method of consultation using examination of the liver, and this continues to be one of the ways in which the gods might be consulted, but they very quickly adapt this to their own methodology by undertaking a vigil in which the sky is examined for a period of time, usually in the quiet of the very early morning, and the sky is mapped out into quadrants, and the movement of birds is observed, and certain kinds of birds and which way they are moving and so forth are taken as omens by the Romans and interpreted by the specialized priests that undertake these observations as to the disposition of the gods. These priests are called augurs, the priests with special responsibility for observing the skies in this way, and the practice of consulting the gods is called augury. And this is why, since consultation of the gods is necessary, as I said, for the induction of an elected magistrate, this is why the installation of an elected official is called to this day inauguration. The natural result of this amongst the Romans is that the priestly class becomes politically empowered, with ramifications that we will talk about. The Latins are, because they're very closely packed together, they are both in rivalry with each other and also in very close communion. Unusual for city-state cultures, it is possible to, for example, marry a citizen of another Latin city and bring that woman home to you. And it is possible to, for the Latin cities to share and celebrate certain festivals together, and so forth and so on. Latium itself, as I said, is a fairly compact area, and Rome becomes the preeminent city amongst the Latins. This is partly by virtue of its location. Rome lies along the trade passageway that parallels the Tiber from the main port at the mouth of the Tiber inland, and to do whatever is necessary, for her as a wife and mother to protect and preserve her family. The most complex of these maybe is Livia, the wife of Augustus, who ends up sharing Augustus's responsibilities of rule over Rome, and doing so in a way that complements Augustus, and becoming responsible for sort of the private aspects of Augustus's rule. And so, for example, she becomes responsible for ensuring the morality of the members of the Senate, and striking from the senatorial rolls those who have engaged in some kind of moral turpitude. But most important, that Livia stands up to stand beside her husband, and to ensure her husband's success. So our two primary source readings for today, the capture of the Sabine women. This is a story that is part of the legend of Romulus, the putative founder of Rome. And the basic idea is that the city of Rome was settled by a group of adventurers under Romulus's command, along with his twin brother Remus. And they were sort of breaking off from the larger cities to the south, and they create this new colony at Rome on the banks of the Tiber, and they realize that after a while that they forgot to bring any women with them. And Romulus's solution for this is strategy, is craft, is subterfuge. He invites all the neighboring communities, including their nearby neighbors, the Sabines, to a joint festival in honor both of the founding of Rome and in honor of gods that they have in common. And while this festival is taking place and all the men are getting drunk, the daughters that they had brought with them are all rounded up by the Romans and married to them in a secret midnight ceremony. Now the Sabines come back the next day, and they are ready to wipe Rome off the map. They're ready to obliterate the Romans for this huge outrage. And according to the story, the armies of the Romans and the Sabines are lined up opposite each other, and they're about to fall into this terrible battle when the women that were abducted and married to the Romans rush out and stand between them and insist that they not fight. And what they demonstrate their legitimacy as a great civilization. They begin to imbibe certain kinds of Greek customs, the Greek language itself, certain ideas of Greek political structure, and Greek ideas of literary expression and rhetoric. And so, by the end of the Republic, the Romans are writing their own histories, they're writing their own plays and poems, originally on the Greek model, and before too long adapted to the Roman spirit and the Roman identity, and so at that point, the Romans start to try to tell their own story. The story of the Romans is determined in part by geography, as it is for all peoples. In the case of the Romans, Rome and Italy is very far from the heart of the civilized world. The civilized world in the ancient era is Mesopotamia and Egypt and Canaan and Anatolia and the Aegean, the Eastern Mediterranean. And this is where the great wealth, this is where huge amounts of commerce and the movement of people and the interchange of ideas is taking place in the Eastern Mediterranean. And so, Rome is lying far from this in the Western Mediterranean. It emerges relatively late in ancient history, and it is part of the much more subdued trade environment of the Western Mediterranean. And so, on top of this, Italy has always been a has always been a combination of different peoples and cultures. Even today, Italy is a single country, but it is not a single culture. And so, in the early history of Italy is conditioned by a couple of things already present in Italy. Before the Indo-Europeans arrive are the Etruscans, and the Etruscans live to the north on the western coast of Italy in the land that is now that is still named for them, Tuscany. The Etruscans called it Etruria. And then the Indo-Europeans arrive, and Indo-European culture, the Indo-European society is one that is unlike that of the Mediterranean peoples. And so the Etruscans, for example, are in some ways a typical Mediterranean people. Even though they are unique and they're not related to anyone, and their language is unrelated to any other language in the ancient world. The Etruscans live in city-states. They are urban, they are centralized, they have a highly hierarchical class structure, they are ruled over by kings, and they live in a city-state, ensuring the smoothness of relations between the classes of the Romans. The Roman monarchy is an elective position. It is not originally dynastic, and so the people that are chosen to be king are each strikingly different from each other. And in fact, Roman legend tends to assign key elements of Roman society, Roman political structure, and religious structure. Each king is sort of responsible for helping to create some part of Rome. And this is a function of legend. This is the fact that we know we have no direct actual history of these rulers. We only have the legends that are associated with them. The structure of Roman society is built around the family, not around the individual. We've seen certain elements of this in other societies to the east, but it is extremely true amongst the Romans. Essentially, the Roman family is this, and when I say family, I mean extended family, the individual sort of subset of the clan, all of the people that descend from a particular individual. This extended family is each one of these is sort of insulated so that everything within it is private, and everything within it is the domain and responsibility of the eldest male, the paterfamilias. And the paterfamilias is sort of is responsible for representing the family to the Roman public. And so, as a result, the Roman society, the Roman aristocracy during the regal period, especially during the Republic, is made up of these chunks of family that interact with each other. And it is very much not about individuals that might arise within these families. It is about the families themselves. And so the paterfamilias becomes the dominant figure within a family, as well as one of a member of a part of a group of similar men that are the heads of their own families, and who are each at similar, each have a similar kind of power and influence within the family, but are more or less the same, more or less part of this collective magistracy that the Romans have. And so, these family representatives form a part of the advisory council to the king that becomes the Senate, and later on, the Senate is the chief advisory body to the Republic. It has no constitutional power, but it is extremely true amongst the Romans. Essentially, the Roman family is this. And when I say family, I mean extended family, the individual sort of subset of the clan, all of the people that descend from a particular individual. This extended family is each one of these is sort of insulated so that everything within it is private, and everything within it is the domain and responsibility of the eldest male, the paterfamilias. And the paterfamilias is sort of is responsible for representing the family to the Roman public. And so, as a result, the Roman society, the Roman aristocracy during the regal period, and especially during the Republic, is made up of these chunks of family that interact with each other, and it is very much not about individuals that might arise within these families. It is about the families themselves. And so the pater familias becomes the dominant figure within a family, as well as one of a member of a part of a group of similar men that are the heads of their own families and who are each at similar, each have a similar kind of power and influence within the family, but are more or less the same, more or less part of this collective magistracy that the Romans have. And so, these family representatives form a part of the advisory council to the king that becomes the Senate, and later on, the Senate is the chief advisory body to the Republic. It has no constitutional power, but it preserves the Roman tradition and sees itself as guarding, protecting, and saving the true nature of what it means to be Roman, what I called before the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancestors. Roman names are very illustrative of the preeminence of the family in Roman life and the unimportance of the individual. And so here we see a fairly typical Roman name, Gaius Iulius Caesar, which is one of the more famous of the Romans, Julius Caesar. It is his name, what we call his name, his nomen, is Iulius, which is his family name, his gens, his clan name. And so these are the Latins that end up being, a little over 20 city-states that are founded in a relatively small and compact region just to the south of the Tiber. The greatest amongst these, what emerges as the stronger and most ambitious, is Rome. And so, as we can see, Italy ends up being this hodgepodge of different kinds of peoples that we can see from the language groupings. And this includes not only the Etruscans and the Indo-European peoples that arrived from the north, but also the Greek colonists that settled in various colonies to the south, in the boot of Italy, further north, including the great city of Neapolis, what is now Naples, and on the island of Sicily, one of the strongest, most wealthy, and most populous Greek colonies in the world, the city of Syracuse, on the island of Sicily. There's a further diversity because the Phoenicians are active traders in this region, originally as part of the Phoenician trade routes that stretch out from the Phoenician homeland in Canaan. Fairly early on, not long before Rome itself is founded, the city of Carthage is founded around sometime in the 8th century. And Carthage, this Phoenician colony, becomes the basis for Phoenician trade power in the Western Mediterranean. Eventually, Carthage becomes the main rival of Rome for trade dominance in the Western Mediterranean. And ultimately, Rome's nemesis. That's a rivalry that builds toward a life or death struggle in the Punic Wars, the wars between Rome and Carthage, that feature such great figures of ancient history as Hannibal. And so there are a number of parallels, as you can see, between Rome and Carthage, and the similar rivalry between the Mycenaeans and Troy that, again, ends up in a life or death struggle during the Bronze Age, several hundred years before. And so the Phoenician traders are active in the Western Mediterranean, and they bring with them a number of things that have influence over the Etruscans and the Romans, the city dwellers on the coastal plains, as opposed to the rustic pastoralists in the highlands. These include the Tyrian purple, the royal purple that is available only from the Phoenicians, and so is therefore a very quickly adopted in amongst the Etruscans and the Romans later as indicative of status. Only people at the top of society could use this. And throughout their entire history, the Romans are not able to undertake any major action without first consulting the gods. The Romans at first used the Etruscan method of consultation using examination of the liver, and this continues to be one of the ways in which the gods might be consulted, but they very quickly adapt this to their own methodology by undertaking a vigil in which the sky is examined for a period of time, usually in the quiet of the very early morning, and the sky is mapped out into quadrants, and the movement of birds is observed, and certain kinds of birds and which way they are moving and so forth are taken as omens by the Romans and interpreted by the specialized priests that undertake these observations as to the disposition of the gods. These priests are called augurs, the priests with special responsibility for observing the skies in this way, and the practice of consulting the gods is called augury. And this is why, since the consultation of the gods is necessary, as I said, for the induction of an elected magistrate, this is why the installation of an elected official is called to this day inauguration. The natural result of this amongst the Romans is that the priestly class becomes politically empowered, with ramifications that we will talk about. The Latins are, because they are very closely packed together, they are both in rivalry with each other and also in very close communion. Unusual for city-state cultures, it is possible to, for example, marry a citizen of another Latin city and bring that woman home to you. It is possible to, for the Latin cities to share and celebrate certain festivals together, and so forth and so on. Latium itself, as I said, is a fairly compact area, and Rome becomes the preeminent city amongst the Latins. This is partly by virtue of its location. Rome lies along the trade passageway that parallels the Tiber from the main ports at the mouth of the Tiber inland, and it also lies at a key, one of the best fords of the Tiber. It is difficult to cross the Tiber to the north and to the south, but in this place here, just south of the island that you can see in this image, there is an excellent. They imbibe a great deal of the Etruscan religious ideology as well. More on that in a moment. And so these are the Latins that end up being, over a little over 20 city-states that are founded in a relatively small and compact region just to the south of the Tiber. The greatest amongst these, what emerges as the stronger and most ambitious, is Rome. And so, as we can see, Italy ends up being this hodgepodge of different kinds of peoples that we can see from the language groupings. And this includes not only the Etruscans and the Indo-European peoples that arrived from the north, but also the Greek colonists that settled in various colonies to the south, in the boot of Italy, further north, including the great city of Neapolis, what is now Naples, and on the island of Sicily, one of the strongest, most wealthy, and most populous Greek colonies in the world, the city of Syracuse, on the island of Sicily. There's a further diversity because the Phoenicians are active traders in this region, originally as part of the Phoenician trade routes that stretch out from the Phoenician homeland in Canaan. Fairly early on, not long before Rome itself is founded, the city of Carthage is founded around sometime in the 8th century. And Carthage, this Phoenician colony, becomes the basis for Phoenician trade power in the Western Mediterranean. Eventually, Carthage becomes the main rival of Rome for trade dominance in the Western Mediterranean, and ultimately Rome's nemesis. That's a rivalry that builds toward a life or death struggle in the Punic Wars, the wars between Rome and Carthage, that feature such great figures of ancient history as Hannibal. And so there are a number of parallels, as you can see, between Rome and Carthage, and the similar rivalry between the Mycenaeans and Troy that again ends up in a life or death struggle during the Bronze Age, several hundred years before. And so the Phoenician traders are active in the Western Mediterranean, and they bring with them a number of things that have influence over the Etruscans and the Romans, the city dwellers on the coastal plains, as opposed to the rustic pastoralists in the highlands. These include the Tyrian purple, the royal purple that is available only from the Phoenicians, and so is therefore a very quickly adopted in amongst the Etruscans and the Romans, later becoming responsible for sort of the private aspects of Augustus's rule. And so, for example, she becomes responsible for ensuring the morality of the members of the Senate and striking from the senatorial rolls those who have engaged in some kind of moral turpitude. But most important that Lilia stands up to stand beside her husband and to ensure her husband's success. So our two primary source readings for today, the capture of the Sabine women. This is a story that is part of the legend of Romulus, the putative founder of Rome. And the basic idea is that the city of Rome was settled by a group of adventurers under Romulus's command, along with his twin brother Remus. And they were sort of breaking off from the larger cities to the south, and they create this new colony at Rome on the banks of the Tiber, and they realize that after a while that they forgot to bring any women with them. And so what Romulus's solution for this is strategy, is craft, is subterfuge. He invites all the neighboring communities, including their nearby neighbors, the Sabines, to a joint festival in honor both of the founding of Rome and in honor of gods that they have in common. And while this festival is taking place and all the men are getting drunk, the daughters that they had brought with them are all rounded up by the Romans and married to them in a secret midnight ceremony. Now the Sabines come back the next day, and they are ready to wipe Rome off the map. They're ready to obliterate the Romans for this huge outrage. And according to the story, the armies of the Romans and the Sabines are lined up opposite each other, and they're about to fall into this terrible battle when the women that were abducted and married to the Romans rush out and stand between them and insist that they not fight. And what they say is that we are Romans now. You cannot take us. You cannot bring us back because we now belong to the Romans. And so, there's a couple of aspects of this. One is, the legal aspect that they have been handed over by marriage. More likely is the idea that this marriage was consummated immediately afterwards, and so this means that they are no longer the Senate, and later on, the Senate is the chief advisory body to the Republic. It has no constitutional power, but it preserves the Roman tradition and sees itself as guarding, protecting, and saving the true nature of what it means to be Roman, what I called before the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancestors. Roman names are very illustrative of the preeminence of the family in Roman life and the unimportance of the individual. And so here we see a fairly typical Roman name, Gaius Julius Caesar, which is one of the more famous of the Romans, Julius Caesar. It is his name, what we call his name, his nomen, is Julius, which is his family name, his gens, his clan name. His praenomen, his first name, even this goes hardly any amount at all in identifying him as an individual. First of all, there are only a dozen to 20 or so of these praenomen, these first names, that are used regularly in Roman society, and so everyone you meet is Gaius or Lucius or Marcus or Posthumus or Aulus or whatever. Quintus, Sixtus. These names are all in common circulation, and on top of this, they are often systematized and automatic. In other words, within a certain family, the first son in each generation might be always named Gaius, and the second son always named Quintus, and so forth. So even the first name, the praenomen, hardly does anything to distinguish the individual. On the contrary, it reinforces the collective nature of the Roman aristocracy. A part of your formal Roman name is your filiation, your immediate ancestors, and so what this is actually saying is Gaius Julius, Gaius Filii, Gaius Nati, which means son of Gaius, grandson of Gaius. And so once again, even your name, is as much about your ancestry and your family as anything else. It is possible for you to get a nickname, a cognomen, which might help to distinguish you. But there are two things about this. First of all, these cognomina tend to be even into the form itself. But the other thing that Bill Wright talks about is that over time there is a greater shift away from this gender polarity, and there's more of a sense of presence and visibility for women, and for the importance of the marital bond by the time we get to the imperial era. Two Matrons of the Late Republic is an interesting article that looks at a few sort of case studies. One of which is Servilia, who is the mother of Brutus, the assassin, and a mistress of Julius Caesar. And so, this is sort of to get a sense of the kinds of freedom and choices that are available to aristocratic matrons of the late Republic. The idea that there are certain kinds of choices and freedoms that are available that are not necessarily immediately obvious to us. And this is particularly, in light of the fact that in the period of the first emperors, at the beginning of the Principate, we're in the time of the first clan of emperors is called the Julio-Claudians, and so this is Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Nero, and the Julio-Claudians, this whole extended family, they rule over Rome for many decades. Augustus himself has power over Rome in one way or another for 50 years. But this family is short on men, and so there is a need for not only the assistance of women like Livia, Augustus's wife, and Agrippinilla, and Antonia, and so forth and so on. To not only for the assistance of women, but also there is a very unusual sense to which legitimacy for rule is transmitted through women in the Julio-Claudians, and so this is to a certain extent this is not an exception, but it's the visibility and role of women in the Julio-Claudian family is much more expanded because of the accidental nature of this extended family. But it does mean that the precedent is set very early on for the importance, the contributions of female members of the imperial family, especially wives of emperors. And so the idea of an Augusta, the idea of an empress who has a role not in ruling over the Roman Empire, but in assisting the to stretch out from the Phoenician homeland in Canaan. And fairly early on, not long before Rome itself is founded, the city of Carthage is founded around sometime in the 8th century. And Carthage, this Phoenician colony, becomes the basis for Phoenician trade power in the Western Mediterranean. Eventually, Carthage becomes the main rival of Rome for trade dominance in the Western Mediterranean, and ultimately Rome's nemesis. That's a rivalry that builds toward a life or death struggle in the Punic Wars, the wars between Rome and Carthage, that feature such great figures of ancient history as Hannibal. And so there are a number of parallels, as you can see, between Rome and Carthage, and the similar rivalry between the Mycenaeans and Troy that, again, ends up in a life or death struggle during the Bronze Age, several hundred years before. And so the Phoenician traders are active in the Western Mediterranean, and they bring with them a number of things that have influence over the Etruscans and the Romans, the city dwellers on the coastal plains, as opposed to the rustic pastoralists in the highlands. These include the Tyrian purple, the royal purple that is available only from the Phoenicians, and so is therefore a very quickly adopted amongst the Etruscans and the Romans later as indicative of status. Only people at the top of society could use this color of purple, and also the alphabet. As the Phoenicians had passed their phonetic alphabet to the Greeks, so too they pass it to the Etruscans, who pass it further on to the Romans. To the south, Magna Graecia, the lands of the Greeks in southern Italy, is still in very lively contact with the Greek world of the Aegean. Italy is not that far away from Greece, and so the Greeks of Magna Graecia are very much in tune with the burgeoning culture of the Greeks, very much in tune with the Greek ideas of expression, and also very wealthy from trade. The Etruscans themselves, what we can say about the Etruscans is relatively limited, because the Etruscan society is eventually subsumed by the Romans. The Romans, as part of their process of dominion, undertake a process of Romanization, in which the culture of the lands that they rule over is slowly absorbed into the Romans, and thereby is assimilated and starts to disappear. So the Romans, captives of war and so forth, but they don't assume that the condition of slave is hereditary, that certain kinds of people are meant to be slaves or whatever. They have much less of a sense of us versus them than even the Greeks, with their divide between Hellas and the barbarians. The Romans come from an environment of diversity within Italy, and the more places they dominate, the more diverse their dominion becomes. And so their concept of enslavement includes the idea that this is a temporary condition. Manumission is freely available. Slaves can purchase their freedom, or they might be freed after many years of good service. And so as a result, there's a large population of freedmen and freedwomen in Roman society that are so we have the slaves as this bottom class, and we have there's another layer of people that are important to the economy, that often serve in sort of positions in supervision of slaves, the freedmen and freedwomen, and then the Roman citizens. And we'll be talking more in in another lecture about the freed woman and the slave woman and how we understand their role in Roman society. The Romans place a great deal of importance on adapting to whatever is demanded in a particular crisis. They focus on the Roman identity and ensuring that it survives, but they understand that in order to survive, they must respond to crises with flexibility and with an openness to adapting to and adopting whatever new idea is necessary. This comes in part from having grown up between these much older and wealthier cultures, the Etruscans to the north and the Greeks to the south, and the awareness that they are late to the scene and that their origins are much more modest. The Romans know from the beginning that they are not the oldest or most sophisticated or advanced society, and so what they concentrate on is for Rome to be the strongest and the most successful. That there is the quality of being a Roman, this rejection of luxury and ostentation and indolence, this embracing of sacrifice and austerity. This will make the Roman a better kind of person, despite the fact that Rome itself is younger and rawer than all of these older and wealthier, of luxury and ostentation and indolence, this embracing of sacrifice and austerity. This will make the Roman a better kind of person, despite the fact that Rome itself is younger and rawer than all of these older and wealthier societies. And so when the Romans encounter a crisis, they take into themselves whatever is necessary in order for that quality of being a Roman to advance to the next chapter of their story, rather than being crushed and destroyed by those who might be older and more powerful than themselves. And eventually, through this stratagem, the Romans become the strongest and most powerful nation in the world. All right, so the readings, the Roman Matron. This is a great chapter. This is very important that you read this chapter if you haven't already. This is an excellent summary of a huge amount of information about what it means to be a Roman aristocratic woman, a wife and mother within the Roman nobility, the Romans themselves had very definite ideas of what is the ideal Roman matron, in the same way that they had very definite ideas about what is the ideal Roman male. We see certain elements of this in the Roman women that are held up for praise. And so we see mentioned at the beginning of this chapter Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi. The Gracchi are two radical politicians that helped to bring about the years of civil war that ended the Republic. But Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi, is remembered as being the ideal Roman matron, both by Roman men and by Roman women. A century or two later, you still see women saying to themselves, "What would Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi, do in this situation?" And so it's striking what it is that she is praised for. Cornelia is far from being subservient or submissive. On the contrary, she is positive and engaged and aggressive on behalf of her family. We see a number of other examples of different kinds of praiseworthy matrons. We see Octavia, the sister of Octavius, the Emperor Augustus. Octavia is remembered as being praised because even though she was provoked through by the misbehavior of her husband Mark Antony, who ended up abandoning her for